Welcome back. President Cyril Ramaphosa met U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House on Wednesday to engage in crucial talks aimed at strengthening trade and bilateral relations between South Africa as well as the United States. The meeting was intended to reset economic ties and foster deeper cooperation. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn when President Trump raised controversial claims of so-called genocide in South Africa, a move that shifted focus away from the central goal of rebuilding trade relations. To help us unpack what this means for South Africa's international image and diplomatic ties with the U.S., we are joined now by Professor Isike, an international relations expert from the University of Pretoria Prof. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Now, we saw a lot of mixed reactions, especially from South Africans, when we watched that conversation between the two presidents. What was your assessment regarding the significance of President Ramaphosa's recent visit in strengthening South Africa's diplomatic as well as economic ties?
Well, thank you, Katleko, for having me. Look, it was people had mixed feelings, right? A lot of people thought that South Africa would go get embarrassed in the White House and that there'll be a lot of high-stake drama. There was a bit of those drama, but our president, with his experience and calm demeanor, actually diffused a lot of the drama that we saw in the Oval Office. Essentially, I think that they were a bit overwhelmed by the Zelensky effect, fear of the Zelensky effect, and became a bit too cautious and missed a few opportunities here and there to clarify a few things. However, beyond the optics of what we saw in the Oval Office, when they went behind closed doors, there was little mention of the genocide issues. There was no mention at all, well, brief mention of the Israel ICJ case that South Africa prosecuted, which many thought was the main issue. Of course, Trump is an admirer of Putin of Russia, and so didn't even go there at all. It was essentially about trade and how to calibrate that. And I would say that if you consider what happened behind closed doors, the visit was largely successful for South Africa. They've managed to keep the doors open. The doors were shut on South Africa before. President Ramaphosa took people that Trump listened to, and behind closed doors, they were very jovial, and they actually participated in useful discussions. So I think that the door is now open for negotiations, and we'll see signs of that in President Trump attending the G20 summit in November.
So, Prof, you make mention of a few missed opportunities in clarifying a few issues. Which ones would you say were issues that really could have stood out had they clarified them in that Oval Office?
Well, in hindsight, so because they were overwhelmed, they missed an opportunity to be able to say one thing, the fact that those videos they showed of President Zuma and Malema of the EFF chanting those, struggle songs, there's no correlation, but there's no proof of any linkage between those songs and actual farm murders, right? Those farm murders had been happening even before Julius Malema left the ANC and became EFF. So and even after I started singing those songs, they will not find any proof that shows that as a result of this singing, some people got, carried away and went to kill farmers. So once you can't have that link, it is conjecture to begin to say that that amounted to anything. But like President Ramaphosa said, these people are not in government, so whatever expressions they have, they express, whatever feelings they express, which they have a right to express, do not find their way into government policy, and that's a valid point to also make. However, what would have been more convincing would be what I said about trying to show that there's no linkage from statistics. But the good thing is that when you listen to what the world is saying, including even Americans themselves, they are saying that Ramaphosa was more convincing than Trump did in terms of the kind of information that he was peddling as evidence.
And I mean, in how he was convincing, in how he explained that none of these really do exist in South Africa. Of course, we're not so privy to the extent of what was discussed in the private meeting, but from what you're saying in terms of what we could have possibly seen, what would you say would be the key outcomes from this visit that could then influence future collaborations between us as a country and the US, especially in areas of trade, security, as well as technology?
I think that, President Ramaphosa said it would take Trump to listen to the diverse voices, not just in the room, but from different voices in South Africa and friends of South Africa all over the world. And when Johan Rupert was talking, he actually paid attention, and from his body language, you could see that, he listened, and that's important for him to listen and hear. He may still push some of those rhetorics because he's Trump. But when you watch the semiotics, the body language of how Ramaphosa was welcomed, how he was introduced to Trump's team, if you look at Trump's demeanor and those of the ministers, there was all respect and admiration and kudos for Ramaphosa. And we didn't see these visuals until after. Actually, only saw them yesterday. So those tell you that beyond the optics, the drama, and the show that Trump put up with the Oval Office with those videos and those clips, newspaper clips, some of which actually didn't take place in South Africa, behind closed doors, behind the Oval Office debacle, there was cordiality, there was respect, and that is important because before now the door was completely shut. So now there can be an engagement, and I think that that's a useful outcome in itself.
And that engagement, Prof, do you think it could lead to the reversal of some of the tariffs that have been imposed on us and the cutting of the aid?
Well, the door is open for negotiations. There were a few negotiations. It will depend on how South Africa is able to, what kind of offer it was able to give. Trump is a dealer. If you give him a good deal, if he senses that he's benefiting from something, he would yield. Of course, we know that AGOA will never come back, and there were a few of the exports to the US that were under the AGOA dispensation that South Africa is now negotiating bilaterally with the US, and they're presenting these with a few things, carrots to just water the deal, So I think that eventually Trump respects those who listen to him, come to the White House to beg and say, okay, can we talk? South Africa has done that. So I would expect that some of the tariffs will go down, and there may be a free dispensation for a few of South African goods, especially as America would also want a free dispensation for its manganese and platinum.
And would you describe it as that, Prof, that this was South Africa going to beg at the White House?
Well, look, it was not necessarily begging, right? It was more, if you look, if Ramaphosa was to allow sentiments and ego to come in, like he said, the two economies are incomparable. If they are to face off completely, South Africa will be the biggest loser because of the small nature of our economy and the high level of unemployment. So if the president says, look, I would as a president, I'm supposed to take insults in order to better my people, so I'll forget myself. But if I go get the deal that will keep jobs in South Africa, keep people employed, I will take those insults because that's what leaders do. So if you look at it from that perspective, if he gets those through, then it's not necessarily, begging. It's about getting results. And I think that he did get results, and there may be more good things to come out of all of this. It's not something that will happen overnight. The most important thing, though, is having the door open. He's achieved that. There'll be negotiations. South Africa will have something to offer. Trump will like it, and that will be the beginning of better things to come.
Speaking of the beginning of better things to come, we do know the president said that the issue of Starlink was not discussed in the meeting. But how would amending BEE laws to accommodate this foreign direct investment bode for South Africa? And how might such reforms influence economic inclusion and foreign investment in our country?
Well, I don't think they'll scrap it completely. There will be this transformation is imperative in South Africa, given the over 100 years of colonialism and apartheid. Those who say, well, it's been 30 years and government has been corrupt and have not been able to do anything, do not understand the political economy and the political geography of apartheid and how people were dehumanized and displaced, and that the effects of these things will last beyond 30 years, right? Is the government corrupt, and has the government done well in terms of delivering services? The answer is no. However, the transformation imperative is still important. So whether it is going to be reducing BEE quota or putting something in place that will enable some transformation to take place, that will still happen. South Africa, I don't think, is going to completely give Elon Musk 100% passage to come into South Africa, open Starlink, and take all the profits back to the United States. There will be some form of reinvestment back to South Africa that will meet that objective. There may be a deal to reduce the percentage, and there may be a deal to have less government participation or ownership in the business, but there will be some form of those, and it will all depend on how much they negotiate. But the idea that Elon Musk will come here and just do as he pleases, I think it's not just going to happen.
Lastly, Prof, just on geopolitical dynamics and just considering the current global geopolitical climate, what strategic advantages or challenges do you see South Africa facing in balancing its relations with major powers like the US as well as China?
I think the first one would be consistency. South Africa, many people say that foreign policy should be about economic diplomacy alone, but foreign policy is also about principles and values, right? You define your values and make sure that you align your foreign policy actions to those values. Once there's consistency in applying that, nobody can fault you. The problem with South Africa had was the inconsistencies in applying, foreign policy actions and values. And I think from the moment President Ramaphosa, in a family meeting, if you like, read out to South Africans the values and principles and foreign policy behavior of South Africa, they've been fairly consistent since then. I mean, you see why they coddle Ukraine as well as they coddle Russia. Initially, it was just about Russia, forgetting that Ukraine was part of the bigger USSR that they were supposed to be loyal to and have friendship ties with, if that was the reason for coddling to Russia in the first place. So consistency would be the challenge, and then also trying to address internal issues that distract from a soft power. It needs to be able to fix immigration. It needs to be able to open itself up for trade, intra-African trade, and just keep being consistent and fighting crime. And I think that it was clear that fighting crime will be one of the things that needs to happen in order to make people feel more safe. And that adds to its soft power value. And South Africa is better off as a soft power, mainstreamed into a middle power, than for it to punch above its weight abroad, but it has internal domestic problems that put questions on its soft power profile.
All right, Prof, thank you so much for your time and for the lesson that you've given us today. That was Professor Chris Isike, who's the Director of the African Center for the Study of United States at the University of Pretoria.